Hello and welcome to episode 116 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where we help you get stronger, run faster, and enjoy lifelong injury-free running. So today we have a very special guest with us today. We have Dr. Emily Splichal, who is a podiatrist and a human movement specialist, is the mind behind Naboso with a spirit to challenge conformity. Dr. Splichal has taken her conventional podiatric medical degree and combined it with years of experience and expertise in human movement and sensory science to found Naboso. Dr. Splichal believes that our experience in this world is built around sensory stimulation and our ability to process, perceive, and integrate this information effectively. Since 2012, Dr. Splichal has been traveling the world to share her unique approach to human movement, foot function, and barefoot science. Having taught in 35 countries and to 20,000 professionals, Dr. Splichal has quickly become a global leader in barefoot training and rehabilitation. So we are very fortunate to have her on the show today. Dr. Splichal, thank you so much for accepting my invite to come on the show. All right. So I am having a little of speaker technical difficulties, but now I am good to go. So my apologies. I actually did not hear what you said there. Do you mind just repeating that so I can hear?
Oh, of course.
There
I
we
said
go.
I'm so excited to be here, Dwayne, with all of your listeners.
Oh, okay.
Thank you
No,
so much.
we are super excited. We're super grateful. So, guys, in this episode, we are going to be chatting about some common questions we get within our healthy runner community when it comes to foot muscle activation, strengthening, as well as recovery. We know how important it is to recover as runners. So, if you're a runner who has ever suffered from foot pain, ankle pain, whether it's plantar fasciitis, Morton's neuroma, posterior tibial tendonitis, Achilles pain, all the common culprits we talk about often, this is going to be super beneficial for you. We are going to really do a deep dive today. We're going to cover the importance of foot stability for runners. We're going to talk about what is sensory stimulation and how you can reduce foot pain. We're going to also talk about how we can, as runners, prevent the old dreaded bunion progression so we don't need surgery. And then we're going to talk about, can Naboso products help Morton's neuroma? And then what are the benefits of toe spacers? I know many runners use toe spacers. So we're going to talk about, are there any benefits to these? Like, are we using them just because we're using them, or what is the actual benefit? So we have the expert here today, guys. So I am really, really excited about this, Dr. Splichal. And on the show, just like you believe in movement, we are big fans of moving to warm up as runners. So we always do a dynamic warm up with all of our guests to really share a little bit about them. I shared your formal bio. So can you tell the listeners kind of, where you call home and give us a bit more backstory on how you really got to this point in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again. Thank you to all the listeners. So I am actually new to Arizona. I've been here about a year. Before that, I was living in New York City, smack in the middle of Manhattan for 20 years. I practiced there for
Okay.
10 years. So it was a very specific type of patient being in a very walking based city. So I definitely saw unique injuries. But even before podiatry, my background was in fitness. I was a competitive gymnast for 13 years, and then I got into fitness. I've actually been in the fitness industry for over 20 years as personal trainer, group exercise, and now I have an education company for fitness professionals as well as physical therapists and health and wellness professionals. But when it comes to feet and movement, the aspect that I am very passionate about is sensory stimulation. I love to talk about human movement, but the aspect of joints and muscles and a very physics-based approach doesn't really change. The part of human movement that is continuously being explored and is changing and evolving of what we understand is that is neurological based, nervous system based. If the listeners are familiar with fascia, fascia is actually a new topic within health, wellness, and medicine, where before people didn't really understand what that tissue was and how powerful it was. So that's just an example of really how neuroscience or sensory science has shifted into health and wellness.
Wow, that's definitely very interesting. And one thing that I like about your trajectory with your career, and I find some similarities with myself as starting out as kind of a traditional physical therapist, and then kind of went the academia route, PhD, all of that. And now I'm kind of doing a lot of coaching itself, right? And run coaching, and really blending that health aspect in with running plans and with strength programs and with movement. And I love that you are a podiatrist, but you really focus on the movement part, because the foot is connected to the rest of the body last time I checked, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just the foot in isolation down by itself. And yeah, I would imagine with your gymnastics background. So I had a daughter who did over 10 years gymnastics, and I wound up specializing for probably like 5 years of my career in gymnastics medicine, and gave a bunch of talks, did some research down that realm. So, gymnasts being barefoot all the time, and they need good foot function, and it's so important for their movement. And I'm sure some of that experience that you've had in your life has impacted the way you probably look at the body, right?
Yeah, 100%. I actually got into fitness, podiatry, movement through the Barefoot avenue. And when I graduated from podiatry school and really started on the education circuit, was at the height of the barefoot running boom. So all the
Yep.
runners, right? The Born to Run and the Five Fingers, Nike Free, all of that was kind of the peak of when I was just first entering really into this industry. And I actually left residency, my podiatry surgical residency, to go back to school. And I went to AT Still. You had mentioned that offline before we started recording. And I went back to AT Still to get my master's in human movement. And I focused on barefoot science. So that really helped me create this connection between traditional podiatry, my fitness background, my movement background, with a master's looking at barefoot science. And it really connected all of really how I now look at feet and function.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I love how you just kind of integrated all of those things, and to do what you do now. And you share some really great content in all of your platforms that I've seen. I guess I will honestly, how I really got introduced to you was actually at our National Physical Therapy Conference. And I was there, and Naboso was there in the exhibit hall. And I was very intrigued by the product line, and I'm always looking for ways that I can help my runners with their foot ailments, and I'm always looking for new ways that I can recover right better. And I'm a big fan of compression socks, and I'm a really value foot strengthening. And I got into a conversation with one of your representatives there, and they mentioned you, and I was like, really? Oh, I definitely have to have her on the show. And then I started following some of your content, and yeah, this is going to be super valuable for all the runners out there, that are all the topics that we've talked about, right? And even if you've wondered, and I would love to get your take at the end about barefoot running, and some of your thoughts on that, and why it was so popular, and then kind of not as popular nowadays, and we can kind of talk about that. But if we can even just get into, in your mind, when it comes to let's just kind of focus on running right now, and we can obviously extrapolate that to other activities and other sports. But for runners specifically, where do you see the importance of foot stability?
Yeah, so my three pillars for overall foot function is optimal foot mobility, sufficient sensory stimulation, and then the third is going to be sufficient foot strength. So strength, sensory, and mobility. The strength part is really based off of the repetitive transfer forces that are happening within the foot with every step that you're taking, right? So you're running, doing running versus walking is everything is obviously on a single leg. You have no double limb support. There's higher ground reaction forces. Everything is happening faster. So the foot strength is really how the energy is being transferred. If your foot is strong, but it is not fast, then you will not be able to transfer impact force as well. So when we think about foot strength and foot stability, to me, stability is required for strength. So they're kind of synonymous. It has to be rapid stabilization. So when I teach foot stabilization exercises or foot strengthening exercises, they're very isometric based. They are rapid based. One of my go-to exercises for increasing foot stability and strength is short foot. Short foot is kind of doming or pushing your toes down into the ground. But I don't want it to be a, push your toes into the ground and hold for 10 seconds and relax, and then do that for 10 repetitions, 3 sets. So it becomes a very kind of a traditional reps and set based exercise. I want it to be integrated. I want your feet to be contracting at the same time that your pelvic floor does and your deep core muscles. Also at the same time as your diaphragm is exhaling. So I want that strength and stability to also be stacked or integrated. And then I will want it to be, like I said, rapid. So I want you to quickly contract your foot with your core and then relax it very quickly, because then that's actually transferring to the demands of running. And it's actually functional stability versus this isolated concept of foot stability, which is really where traditional podiatry kind of sits.
Love it. I love it. So integrating it with kind of that rapid contraction that's needed as your foot hits that ground quickly. We have to stabilize that foot in pretty much like microseconds, right? And then we're transferring our weight from whether or not you're a heel striker or a midfoot striker, and then to kind of toe off in, your forefoot and make sure that we have enough stability there to push off a rigid lever, right? And be able to propel ourselves forward and hopefully get faster as runners, like all runners want to get. So that's great. I love how you talked about the speed there. Now, would you start, if you were starting, someone was starting at the beginning point of doing that short foot exercise that you mentioned, would you start with slower contractions so they can develop those mind muscle connections from a motor control standpoint? Or would you start already like trying to activate quickly?
Yes. So there's a couple different ways that you can think about short foot and foot to core integration or foot to core sequencing and strengthening. Is I will do it as a form of activation in the movement prep. So let's say you're doing your warm-ups, light movements, maybe some SMR or foam rolling, something to get your breathing going, stretching, whatever it is that you're doing. I then want you to be doing a few repetitions of foot tripod, spread the digits, push the toes down. As you push the toes down, lift the pelvic floor and exhale. So it's like a 5-second activation, and then relax everything, and then do it again, and then relax. So you're doing that 5 times per side just to sequence these neuromuscular connections. Then if you're doing anything else, like maybe a few squats, you can integrate it into a squat. So it becomes a activation technique in a focused contraction way. It becomes a way to create stability during a larger movement like a squat, right? And then it becomes something that could be done on its own in more repetitions. So a box jump, and as you land on the box, you rapidly contract. So I know it's a little hard to kind of translate on a podcast, but I definitely encourage people to dive down that rabbit hole of short foot and foot to core programming, because it's so powerful. But it becomes more of a lens through which you look at movement, which means any exercise that you're doing, whether it's swinging kettlebells on the non-run days or on your cross conditioning days, is as you swing the bell, I need you to be doing short foot on the upswing of the bell because you're creating a strong foundation with your center of mass and how that coordinates with your breath. So it becomes everything integrated into your programming, into your activation, your movement prep, your lower body training. So it becomes just really infiltrated. And that's why it's a little bit difficult to say this is one way to do it.
No, I love that. And I love how you really spoke to the progression and trying to tie it to function, right? So for runners, if you're going to be doing a functional, exercise, something like a reverse lunge or explosive lunge, or, any really kind of reciprocal movement based exercise that you're doing, some type of marching with the kettlebell and you're reaching up to the ceiling, that you are translating that foot activation. And last question on this foot stability, just because I am very interested in this, and then we'll kind of move on to kind of a different topic, but do you find that eventually folks will not have to think as much once they kind of learn how to activate? They add those progressions that you talked about, that they're integrating that contraction into their function and their, various exercises or movements, and then it becomes somewhat automatic?
Yeah, that is the ultimate goal. So when I teach a patient or clients, which is shifted a little bit now, partly because of COVID, but as my career has shifted, that I now train the trainer to do it. But it is me. So just picture me training you, and I am cueing very consciously, toes down, exhale, exhale, exhale. So it's very conscious, conscious, conscious. You do that enough times, conscious programming repeatedly is then eventually going to become subconscious. So I'm forcing you to be present and aware of the movement pattern and your foundation and your feet, so that, yes, it does become reflexive or subconscious. And that you could see by, let's take gymnasts again as an example, right? That in the beginning of a gymnast, even if the listeners don't know anything about gymnastics, just imagine that you would have a gymnast and you're like, okay, point your toes, right? You got to look pretty, point your toes and finish the line, right? Eventually, you are not cueing that to a gymnast anymore. It becomes automatic. So, like as an example, if I were to jump and grab a bar, I would subconsciously, reflexively, not even think about it, my toes would point because it's so programmed into my nervous system. But the other layer that I would want for me, for the gymnast, for the runners even, is that as I'm jumping to grab the bar, my toes reflexively point, or my ankle does. What was happening at the same time is I'm actually contracting my foot. I'm contracting my foot and I'm contracting my core. So that's the second layer of the reflex that I want people to realize is actually happening during a joint movement. Is there's this strong subconscious muscle contraction or fascial tensioning response that is pre-programmed into your nervous system. And that's what I try to do with short foot. And I've done that with many, many runners, so that they are running and they know that their foot is contracting and stiffening to load and unload impact forces very efficiently. And they don't need to think about it, because technically it's happening so fast that you can't think about it. If you are trying to stabilize your foot or contract your foot when you're running, it's impossible. It's happening way too fast. You can't. And it's one of the things that I see in so many of my patients is they try to walk conscious and slow it down. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. Walking and running is by design subconscious. So I need you to break it down and do the single leg stance, single leg squat. So every time the runner is doing a single leg squat, that's where you're focusing on short foot, foot to core. Exhale as the toes go down.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Oh my goodness. Couldn't agree more. And I really love that aspect of the progression, and that it does become automatic. And I think of this, we talk a lot on the podcast about knee pain as well, because that's kind of very common in runners. And a lot of runners I see with like runner's knee, IT band problems, it's because they have no clue how to activate their deep hip external rotator muscles. So I find like the short foot muscles similar to those like deep butt muscles that no one knows how to actually activate and control. And we find a lot of weakness in those muscles. And I have the same approach with those muscles. Learn how to activate it first, find out where they are, and then you need to progress from a simple clamshell exercise to exercise where your foot's on the ground, like it is when you're running. And now we're learning how to control that knee position by using that activation. And then when you're running, you're not thinking like you just mentioned with the, the intrinsic foot muscles to, oh, contract my piriformis, my deep rotators. Let me contract, right? It's just happening now because we know how to use those muscles. And I just love that approach that you have about the body, because we can extrapolate that to many other muscles as well. And so you kind of covered the stability bucket and having enough like activation strength, which is amazing. Love it. I can never get enough foot stability conversation, as you could tell. But I'm really intrigued, honestly, because I even haven't had a lot of training in the area of sensory stimulation. And I know that is a big belief system of yours. And you kind of mentioned as like that second bucket besides mobility. I think a lot of people know about mobility, and we've talked about, joint mobility versus like muscle length and soft tissue mobility before in the podcast, but sensory stimulation, we have never talked about. So if you could, can you just describe what that means and then how you utilize it to actually help someone with their foot pain?
Absolutely. So we can think about sensory stimulation as the sensory information that our body perceives as it relates to the external world. So there are four main sensory input systems that help us to control our movements. We have our eyes, we have our ears, which is vestibular, but it's also auditory, so sound. So you actually get two bonuses out of one with the ears. And then you have your joints, which is proprioceptive or proprioception. And then you have touch or tactile, which is going to be mechanoception. Now, the one that probably the listeners are the most familiar with is proprioception. It gets thrown around the most, is that people say, I'm doing proprioceptive training because I sprained my ankle, or I had, maybe an arthroscopy to my knee. So now I'm going to do some proprioceptive training to strengthen the nerves around the knee, right? So when we think of sensory and the control of movement, the two that I focus on the most is going to be proprioception and mechanoception. Now, for the listeners, the biggest difference between that, because they're confused a lot, is that mechanoception is going to be tactile or touch. These nerves or sensory input system is on the palm of the hand and the bottom of the feet. So the skin in the bottom of the feet is mechanoceptive, and it's reading very specific information that your joints don't necessarily read. Now, the input that you read from the bottom of the foot, there are four main input systems or four nerves, which is texture. I'll talk about Naboso in a second. It's texture, skin stretch. So if you're using something like kinesiology tape that's stretching skin, or even traditional athletic tape. And then the other two nerves are sensitive to low frequency vibration and high frequency vibration. So vibration. What vibration is impact forces. So every time your foot pounds the pavement or pounds the ground that you're running on, you are experiencing impact forces as vibration. So that stimuli, or understanding that it's actually vibration that's entering into your nervous system, is important to help you to understand, what happens when I'm on other surfaces, or I put cushion in my shoes? How do I use vibration, right? So it's a really, really powerful sensory stimulus to the feet and to the nervous system. The other really powerful one is texture, and that's what we focus on at Naboso. But I'm actually going to say that it actually isn't really texture. What it is it's 2-point discrimination. And what that is just think about Braille. So braille dots, right? Go to an ATM that's on every ATM, right? And take a look and you'll see the little braille dots, and they're very specific distances from each other. And there's certain heights, right? There's a uniqueness to that stimulus so that your nervous system can read it. That is 2-point discrimination, right? You're feeling 2 points and saying, I feel 2 points. If they were too close, it would be like a big blob. If they're too far away, I mean, that's just too far away for your nervous system to create any sort of acuity around that. So all of the Naboso products are based off of that science. And what it is it's saying, okay, all of our products have these tiny little pyramids. For those that are on YouTube or actually on Facebook as well, they could see that there's little pyramids on all of our products. That's the neuroball. Here's our socks. There's little pyramids across it. The pyramid is creating a point, and then the distance between the pyramids is very specific to activate the same effect as braille. Okay, so that's 2-point discrimination. That is a very powerful stimulus to the bottom of the feet and the palm of the hand as well. So when I'm helping runners and patients and really anyone in any of my education, the 2 stimuli that I really focus on is 2-point discrimination and vibration, because they're so powerful to the nervous system. They are mechanoceptive. Proprioception is going to be like a wobble board, a Dynadisc, using a Bosu. You're standing on something that is unstable and it's making your foot go from one direction to the other direction, which is stretching the tendons and the ligaments and creating a stretch reflex almost within that tissue. That's a different type of stimulus to the nervous system. So I'll just kind of let it there to allow that to sit a little bit on how I start to look at sensory stimulation, feet, and movement.
Yeah. And do you know, has it been shown that those that have pain, so we're going to say any injury, right, is going to cause pain, can pain signals block some of the sensory stimulation? Like I know pain signals can block muscle activation, right? And sending that kind of efferent input down to our muscles to be able to activate and use them, and we get muscle inhibition. If anyone thinks about kind of the classic of, or even if you've had Achilles pain or any ankle surgery, right? You think about if you were in a boot, a walking boot, like your calf muscle atrophied away, like it's half the size as your other calf, right? Same thing happens at the knee with the quads. If anyone's had ACL surgery or any type of knee surgery, does the same thing happen with some of these other inputs that you're talking about? Do you know, are they, I guess, do they get inhibited when we have pain or an injury?
Well, so one way where I could say that you will see inhibition is, or denervation and atrophy, is chronic use of supportive cushioned shoes. You can actually see an atrophy or a denervation to the intrinsic muscles in the bottom of the feet. Other research studies showing that chronic use of orthotics and rigid arch supports that are essentially doing the work of your foot, which is what the shoe with the cushion is doing the work of the foot, that you can see atrophy of those intrinsic muscles. Some other injuries that you can see is different types of plantar fasciitis, a Baxter's nerve entrapment, which is a differential for plantar fasciitis. You can see denervation of the intrinsic muscles. So those are some of the, where you could start to see, okay, this lack of stimulation. Now, what we do at Naboso, what I've seen anecdotally with some of our users is plantar fasciitis, neuromas, other itises within the foot, is that they will bring in our insoles or our socks, our neuroball, and say that they now feel that their foot is more supported so they don't feel that same pain. We've also had some painful neuropathy, find that the stimulus of the Naboso blocks the pain trigger from the neuropathy. So hopefully that's starting to kind of get to what you're saying. What I look at as the muscle atrophy that you were saying with the calf or the quad is the intrinsics in the bottom of the foot. And as soon as you start to get atrophy in the intrinsics in the bottom of the foot, you have now created a inherent loss of stability, which you love your stability. So you've lost the stability in your foot. And because the deep foot muscles actually connect to your pelvic floor and your deep core muscles, I'm now dealing with someone with a destabilized pelvis. So you now have knee pain, hip labral stress, SI joint pain, adductor spasms, groin pain. Go every direction if you want to go distal or proximal to the pelvis of other issues that could be transferred from that. So I'm all about intrinsic foot, and I'm very much about intrinsic core muscles and how they have to both be functioning and connected.
Yeah. So kind of talking about how those muscles are part of our like feed forward or our postural control system, right? Where there are those muscles that are activating first, or should be, prior to kind of moving, right? Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. And then you're utilizing, just to kind of bring it full circle with the sensory stimulation, you're utilizing sensory stimulation in order to improve the activation of that foot core.
Yes. So the way that I look at programming, and that I want the listeners to think about it, maybe it's the New Yorker in me, is that
Hey, I'm originally from New York as well.
I just got to get to point Z right away. Like, come on, the clock is ticking, right?
Yes.
We need to like get cracking.
Yes.
Right? Life is short. Let's activate more effectively. So that's the way that I look at the Naboso products. We have mats. So I would say if you are doing movement prep and you're trying to wake up the feet and activate the feet, I got to get you out of your shoes before you're running. So I call it barefoot before shod. Shod means with shoes on. If you're doing barefoot movement prep, I want you on a surface that's going to wake up your nervous system even faster or more effectively, which means I either need you on a harder surface, like a hardwood floor is really the best, or dirt, grass, natural surfaces, right? I don't want you on a wrestling mat or on a soft squishy mat or your living room carpet. I want you on something harder. And then ideally on top of that is that if I had you on a vibration platform, so I am all about whole body vibration training, I would want you on a vibration platform for at least 5 minutes before you're running. So it's waking up your nervous system. Or I would want you on a Naboso mat and you're doing your short foot to core movement prep on that mat. So you're just kind of going through what you would do anyway, but you're just upgrading it by saying no shoes, activating surface.
Right. Okay. Love it. So we're really kind of waking things up, and I everything that you described there, that was literally me. So just to give you my backstory with orthotics is I got put in, basically semi-rigid, rigid orthotics when I was a PT student by one of my professors. And, I used them for literally probably 15 years straight. And I noticed like literally I could not even activate any foot muscles. Like I literally, I've shared this on the podcast where I have a bunionette deformity. So it's kind of like the bunion, but of the fifth toe for those listening. Yeah. And, my toe goes in. I literally couldn't abduct my toe at all. Like it didn't move. It was like a fixed deformity. And I'm like 30 years old at the time. And I'm like, I literally can't move my toe. Like that is sad. Right. So, and I was getting other problems and my foot mobility was just locked up because I was always in my rigid orthotics and I was always in my supportive shoes because I thought that with my foot structure being slightly overpronated from a structure standpoint, when you look at my alignment statically, I thought I needed to support my arches. Right. And I've really seen the value in getting out of rigid orthotics. And I will just caution any runners who are listening to this right now. And it's like, oh my goodness, I should be wearing my orthotic. That's not what I'm saying. And there is a progression that you need to go through, especially if you've been in them for a while, and don't just go from like orthotics to like straight up barefoot. And then definitely don't try to do that and try to run. So there is a progression. I've been kind of gradually weaning down the type of material in my inserts, and then really going to, when I'm not running, not being in the orthotics. And then now I've progressed that. Thank you, COVID, when my gyms got closed and I had to work out in my living room. I tried working out barefoot. And so you'll see like half of the videos on my YouTube channel are like me barefoot. Not that I've ever tried that before COVID, but I really saw the value in that. And I really felt, once I was able to go back to my gym where I was now wearing, zero drop, lower profile shoes, for my workouts, as opposed to what I used to do of wear the most supportive shoes possible for those workouts. So everything that you described, like I've literally kind of lived that and saw the atrophy in my foot muscles from being too supportive at a fairly young age. We'll call myself young now at 42. So, I want to be able to run till I'm literally in my 90s, right? Like I'm in the box, and I want to know the best ways I could do that. And, a lot of what you're talking about is, I think, very important for runners to hear, and to hear about how their bodies work and how we need to actually utilize these muscles and not always just look for the quick fix, where I feel like a lot of people will go to the brace or the orthotic, or, oh, that's the shoe I should be wearing, let me just wear that. And then all my problems are going to be taken care of and I could just run. And because runners just love to run, and they don't want to do sometimes the other ancillary things that's important as we age to keep us healthy. And that's what we're all about here on the Healthy Runner podcast. So thank you for sharing that. And I did mention bunionette. So I would love to go down the bunion route, because there are many runners out there who have bunions. They've probably been told they need surgery for their bunions. They've probably been told so many things, right? Maybe they shouldn't run because they have this bunion. It's going to get worse and their toe is going to look terrible and they can wear flip-flops. I don't know, whatever they've been told. But how can we, or is there a way that you can prevent the progression of bunions where you may not need surgery one day?
I would probably say that bunions is one of the most, not controversial, but poorly understood according to social media. And everyone has an opinion about bunions. So I try to be very, very clear about my directives around bunions. So the thing with bunions is truly understanding the size of the bunion that you have, and do you have a true bunion? So a majority of bunions are associated with an unstable foot. Now, is it mildly unstable? Is it unstable because there's ligament laxity? Is it unstable because of muscle weakness, whether that's in the foot or that's in the glute? So I want to first make sure that there's this understanding of the bigger picture of what's contributing to the bunion in the first place. Now, let's say it's a moderate bunion. So you have the deviation, there's a bump, there's a prominent bump. Maybe you got a little bit of a dropping of the foot, creating a little bit of laxity. The biggest concern with bunions is that you're starting to deviate off of the cartilage. So you're losing what's called joint centration. A center joint is a beautifully aligned joint with great space and perfect or ideal range of motion, right? So you have good cartilage interfaces. As soon as you start to lose centration or you deviate off of the joint surface, which is classic in a bunion because the one joint surface is going one way and the toe and the joint surface is being pulled in the other way. So people on the YouTube can kind of see that I'm drawing something with my hands. So that deviation is starting to set up this degenerative or cartilage wearing down process. That's where I do get a little bit concerned with bunions, especially with runners, because every time you flex through your joint, you are progressing it. So whether you walk a lot or you run a lot or you're doing both, you're just repeating the number of flexions that are stressing the deviation off of the cartilage. So if that is the case, I try to look at things like toe spacers. And I know you've mentioned this offline, that toe spacers to try to move the toe over to try to center the cartilage so that we do not accelerate the rate at which we're wearing down that joint. That's an important part of bunions, right? Is I have to think about that joint surface. What is the health and the alignment and the cartilage state within that joint in that individual at this moment in time. Then I can say, okay, where are we at as far as prevention, slowing down progression? Do we have to have a surgical conversation? Just where are we, right? The other part of it is making sure that the foot is staying strong. It's doing short foot. It's using sensory stimulation such as Naboso or walking around barefoot. It's just making sure that those intrinsic muscles are being activated, because that's part of how you control the first MPJ or the great toe joint. So that's part of that. I would say that if you are at a point that we have good joint space, you still got good cartilage, you are strengthening the foot, and then you are using something like toe spacers, and you're doing this consistently, and it's become part of your lifestyle, then you can push pause on the progression of the bunion. Pause, not rewind.
Right.
Okay?
So you're not going to get rid of it.
Rewinding is very different, right? The part of bunions that I think is the most misunderstood is that people will gauge a bunion's progression based off of the deviation of the big toe. That's not the bunion. The bunion is actually in the middle of your foot, where the metatarsal is opening and spreading away from the other metatarsal. So it's called an intermetatarsal angle. And that angle between the first and the second metatarsal, which you can only see on X-ray, it's only on X-ray, right, is how I grade bunions. I don't do it based off of the deviation of the big toe. But if you do say, I use toe spacers, I'm doing strengthening, I wear wide natural footwear, everything that is amazing that you should be doing, and you notice that that toe is sitting straighter now, that's good. That's a clinical presentation of the foot that is kind of aesthetic based, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that you reverse the bunion, because the bunion is that joint angle. That joint angle cannot be reversed without surgery. So you want to create stability to prevent that metatarsal from swinging out even further. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. The biggest takeaway on that is keep the foot strong, use the toe spacers, keep the foot flexible, still try to get that sensory stimulation to create a balance so we can pause it.
Love it. And no, thank you for that clarification. And you brought up a lot of great points there. If there is someone listening to this and you are in pain, number one, getting an expert to be able to, properly diagnose your specific condition, because not all bunions are the same, and, take your clinical presentation and determine the best plan of care for you, right? Best course of care for your problem. And I know you mentioned toe spacers. I think I probably counted 3 or 4 times during that one question. So what is this deal with kind of toe spacers? What are the benefits of toe spacers?
I love toe spacers. I actually was recommending them to patients for years and was like, if I'm recommending these so much, I think I should just start selling them through Naboso. So we then started selling them. And this is actually one of our new ones. So this is one of our new spacers that we're launching April 4th. We have a different blue version if you go to naboso.com and look. But what the toe spacers do is this would go onto your foot. Each of these thicker pieces would sit in between the toes. So it'll spread the digits, creating toe space. The way that they work is that by having something in between your toes and spreading them acts kind of like a splint, which is giving a mechanical advantage to your intrinsic muscles. Most hammer toes and toe imbalances, including bunions, are an imbalance between our small muscles in the foot and our large muscles in the leg. So the muscles in the bottom of the foot are called intrinsics. The muscles in the lower leg are extrinsics. So it's a extrinsic intrinsic imbalance. So using toe spacers gives a mechanical advantage to the intrinsics, supporting proper digit function. Now that's not all. In addition, because they are stretching and spreading the digits, you are stretching the small muscles and the fascia in the digits, which can open up the foot. It supports lymphatic flow, circulation. It's awesome for neuromas. So you're opening up the foot, which is great. Another awesome benefit is that your plantar fascia, which runs from your heel into all 5 of your toes, it actually inserts into the base of the toe. When you stretch your toes wide, you actually stretch your plantar fascia. So I will use toe spacers as a benefit for those with arch pain, arch fatigue, plantar fasciitis, even Achilles tendonitis, because your plantar fascia technically connects to your Achilles tendon. So you can stretch that as well. So it becomes a very powerful plantar fascial stretch, forefoot stretch. Open up the foot up from neuromas, stretch the hammer toes, stretch the bunions. And then for someone who may say, I don't have neuromas, plantar fasciitis, hammer toes, I don't. My foot is balanced, right? Then I'll say, you know what? Everyone still benefits from supporting your push-off position. So if you want to optimize the lever that you referenced earlier, which is really the most important position the human foot can achieve, is a lever, which is the calf raise position, right? So you want to have a strong lever where you're going across all 5 MPJs. So you cross all the met heads evenly, and you're rolling through all of the digits, and you have beautiful follow through. That's what contributes to efficient movement, graceful movements. Sorry, you can tell I love toe spacers. I could talk about these for a while.
No, I love it. And do you recommend wearing the toe spacers only when non-weight bearing, or is this something you can wear to walk around it or stand?
All the time, all day,
Okay.
every day. If you want, you can go running in them. You can do your yoga, your Pilates. You can wear them to work, whatever it is. Now, what I will say, just as a warning, is if you're new to using toe spacers, don't put them on your foot and go for, a 5K, 10K run. Like, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You want to try them on first, start them just at night, wear them maybe 30 minutes, get used to them, and then walk around throughout the day with them, maybe do a workout in them. Workout means non-running workout. And then if you feel comfortable, then transition into a shorter run, etc., and then progress. The reason why I say that is that for some people, it feels a little bit kind of funky at first, right? It's just kind
Mm-hmm.
of weird. And I've seen people kind of pick up the foot earlier because it feels weird to roll through the spacers through a full roll through propulsion. So I want to make sure that you're not subconsciously picking your foot up faster and then changing your gait cycle. So that's just one thing that I warn to the runners is progress into them.
Yeah. So like anything, just having that natural kind of progression, the body is going to respond differently to any stimuli we give it. And definitely positioning the toes into more of where they should be positioned, especially if you wear really tight fitting shoes at work. And, being able to splay those toes, I think, like you said, is so important in terms of muscle activation and alleviating pressure, whether it is from neuroma pain, plantar fasciitis, all of those kind of benefits. But that's really nice to hear that your product, the Naboso product toe spacer, is somewhat dynamic and it's not kind of firm and rigid where it's kind of, because I've seen some toe spacers that don't move at all. Like if I try to stand or walk on them, because I've tried that before, if I need to grab some water because I needed to hydrate before a race and I want to stretch out my toes to kind of feel nice and recovered and fresh before my race the day before, it would hurt. So I'm really interested to try out the Naboso toe spacers and, see how they feel with just standing. And yeah, I will definitely follow your advice and make sure I progress in a nice, slow fashion and not just go out there and try to run in them right away. But I'm really excited to hear how dynamic and that you can use them for function. So that's really, really excited. And I know you mentioned neuroma, and we actually had this question on our probably about 5 episodes ago. It was like an Ask Dwayne kind of episode. And I got the question about neuromas, and we never really have done a deep dive on the podcast about Morton's neuroma. So I figured I have the expert on. Why not do a little follow-up to that in some of the questions I answered, but how can the Naboso products, I know you mentioned toe spacers, kind of help someone who is battling that Morton's neuroma?
Yeah. So to understand the neuroma, I'm sure you went into it and all the listeners listened to that episode, right? Of the neuroma being that ball of scarred nerve tissue, typically happens when there is insufficient splay of the foot. So you are starting to pinch or irritate the nerve bundle, which is the neuroma, the nerve bundle. So if you are trying to get pressure off of the nerve bundle, you need to allow the foot to open up. So that's the splay, right? You're supporting the opening up and the spreading. The other way that I often find that neuromas can occur is that it's because the foot is not stabilizing fast enough. And I'll explain this, and if it's confusing, I apologize, but there's this timing that happens through the foot that as you transfer into the lever or you roll forward, which is the position that activates the neuroma, is when you're rolling forward, that's what triggers it, is in a foot that is insufficiently stiff or stable as it's rolling forward, it's kind of loosey-goosey putting pressure on the front of the foot where you actually want it retracted. So the fascia and the connective tissue actually pulls back, and it creates this tensioning effect that allows the foot to spread and not pinch this neuroma. So that has to go back to the timing of the stabilization of the foot. All of the Naboso products act off of sensory stimulation that is faster at creating this tensioning response, the stabilizing response within the body. So if you feel the ground faster, this is all subconscious, you can then create tension, stability, and this retraction that you need so that you don't pinch and irritate the neuroma. So that's where we find that a lot of the Naboso products do benefit. Another part of it is that what our socks specifically, we're doing a research study with them, is showing how it supports foot circulation, or what's called perfusion. So a big part of itises, a neuroma is really a form of an itis because it's an inflamed nerve bundle, right? So there's inflammation that's around the nerve tissue. Is to clear the body of this inflammation is you need circulation support. So the toe spacers create circulation support by opening up the digits, but our socks and our insoles support circulation through the textured stimulation, actually creates a microvascular response. And it's actually demonstrated through thermal regulation that you could look at a foot before and after and actually show that the temperature or the heat, which means the circulation, is getting all the way to the tips of the digits much better than without that circulation support. And this is in normal, healthy individuals. It's not a diabetic or someone who has circulation compromise. So I look at it as a sensory driver, a circulation supporter, and then with the splay, you're actually physically opening up the foot. That's where we find the benefit with neuromas.
I love it. And I could attest to, because I have been using your socks since I went to conference, and I found them very helpful, especially after my long runs and or whenever I'm feeling really tired from like faster running, speed work. So my kind of little recipe here, and I just did this Saturday, I went for my long run, was, you get home, you're like, sweaty, whatever, hop in the shower. And then I put my socks on while I'm having my recovery drink, while I'm making a nice breakfast, because I like to go in the morning, and then you just get a nice New York bagel, right? Get a nice breakfast going to really replenish and fuel after my long run. So I'm wearing my socks, and then I can do maybe an Epsom salt bath after that for a little recovery. So I've really enjoyed the socks, and I feel like they're definitely stimulating sensory, that's for sure. Like those triangles that you kind of mentioned, or pyramids, you feel that like right away, and you're like, whoa, this feels interesting. Like that was like my first impression. This is interesting. Am I gonna like be able to tolerate this walking around? And then I just love wearing in my kitchen, like kind of walking around, cooking and everything. And then I got the compression ones because I just love compression as well. So I've really enjoyed utilizing them, and I do feel like it almost enhances, like, granted, do I know, but it feels good, and that it is helping to stimulate some of that recovery process after our runs. And I can see it really being beneficial even when the weather gets, a lot warmer, and, it's hot, humid weather out there after runs.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can also add for the neuromas is that if someone does feel that they've tried to release the foot, maybe they've tried the splay, the insoles, the socks, and things like that, is that there is a percent of neuromas that are, just a little bit more on that elevated. They're talking a little bit more than they should. I am a full proponent of, if you do need to see a podiatrist and have an injection, whether it's alcohol or some sort of radio frequency ablation or cryoablation, just something to help it a little bit further. There are these outliers that do need a little bit more oomph behind them, and then they can start to look at some of these other products. But even when in my practice, if I see a large neuroma that is very inflamed, and I do either a series of alcohol injections, or I start with a steroid and then do radio frequency ablation, whatever it is, I'm then also saying, I need you to use the toe spacers every day to open it up. I need you to be releasing your foot. I need you to be wearing wide toe box shoes. I'm a huge fan of metatarsal pads. So I'm doing a very holistic, integrated program as well with everything. And if any of the listeners are saying, well, I use orthotics because I've had really, really bad plantar fasciitis and I'm very scared to go away from these custom orthotics, then we say that's okay, right? You could still wear the socks and then be in them, or you could put the Naboso insoles on top of your custom orthotics. We're just trying to say that what are you doing in addition to what is unique to you to enhance the sensory side of foot function? And that's where I do want the listeners to see that you don't have to completely change everything that you're doing and switch over here, right? You might be good and solid in your Hokas with all the cushion, which is okay, right? There's a time and place for Hoka. But what if we add in some sort of texture stimulation to keep that foot engaged while you're in that shoe or on that orthotic? So that's a big part of what I advocate as well through my practice, is the ideal environment, which is minimal and barefoot and sensory, but then there's reality, right? And that reality is, how do I bring as much of this into your unique reality so that we can benefit from it? And that is individualized to every person and every listener. But the more you can start to sprinkle it in, even if it's a little bit, right? Like you're walking around in the socks after you go for a run. That's awesome, right? That's you saying, I'm getting a good 30 minutes probably of sensory stimulation to my feet. So I'm passively recovering my feet so I can keep doing what I love to do, which is run.
Yep. Love it. Love it. And yes, I like that you brought up the point that everyone is individual, and, depending upon your experiences, depending upon your level of fitness, strength wise, foot structure, condition, pain levels, irritability, right? Like there are so many variables that we use as clinicians to determine like best course of action for you. So I'm glad that you brought that up, that it is individualized. And if you could share kind of I would love to hear your thoughts just because I'm kind of curious of the whole, like you mentioned, the barefoot craze and the five finger shoes and, why are they not as popular nowadays? And what are your thoughts about barefoot running?
Yeah, so I am very much an advocate of natural foot function, which means I am going to look more at less structured shoes. I personally would rather be entirely barefoot working out in the gym. Since they know me, they don't mind that I'm barefoot, but doing something like squats and lunges and kettlebells and, whatever lifts that I'm doing, that is really the prime time to take advantage of either being barefoot or extremely minimal, because you are not dealing with rapid acceleration of vertical ground reaction forces, right? So that's where it could be this great time to focus on natural foot function and foot strength. Great. Okay. Then we had the barefoot running boom, which was the five fingers and the free and the born to run, and everyone was confusing barefoot running with a midfoot strike, but really they were kind of synonymous in the way that people were using them. I am an advocate of a midfoot strike pattern because it's just based off of biomechanics of the human body and spring mass theory and how we transfer load. So I'm much more of an advocate of midfoot strike running, which requires a certain type of shoe, like a stack. You can't have a large drop to properly do a midfoot strike. So that's what I'm a supporter of. If someone can do true barefoot running, which means absolutely no shoes and they're naked foot running with a midfoot strike, that's awesome. That's a very small percent that are going to do that, because the foot types and the discipline to progress to something like that is just very unique, right? They're like a 1%. Now, for other footwear, I do, again, typically favor a natural wider toe box, less cushion, less heel toe drop. So if I could put everyone in more like a transitional shoe, that would be great. The Hokas and the New Balance foam, and it's very trendy now in the running space to have cushion. It's just trendy. I was at the running event in December of 21, and every shoe out there is very well cushioned. It is just the trend. It's a maximal shoe versus the minimal shoe. In fact, there was only one minimal shoe company at the running event, and that was Zero Shoes. All the other ones were maximal. I find it very interesting. It just shows the trend that footwear is very trendy. Ultra marathon shoes are now trendy for all distances.
Right.
Hoka really drove that one. Hoka is really the one that you give credit to for that one. The only concern I have with that is that it does create a sensory disconnect between the foot and the ground. So if someone is wearing them and they love them and they swear by them and they have no running injuries and they feel awesome, then great. I don't want to change anything from that, right? But I would just say, could we at least consider trying or being curious about having the Naboso insole so your foot stays awake and connected and feeling and engaged, and it's part of the party and it's talking to your core and your glutes, right? Because that's just the way that your foot is designed to function. And all shoes, even minimal shoes, do create a sensory disconnect between the feet, the ground, the nervous system, the brain. And it's just so powerful in how we actually function. Which if you're not willing to do that, okay, can you at least recover with toe spacers and release your feet possibly on the neuro ball? Like, could you give me that at least,
right,
to keep your foot engaged and connected, right?
Yep.
So I think really at the end of the day, it's about balance, right? And, where do you find your balance if you are happy in a certain environment?
Right. I love your thoughts there. And it really resonates with me because I personally have been through that journey, and I shared on the podcast probably last year at this time, I did an episode on kind of heel drop and what is heel drop, and talked about how I was gradually decreasing my heel drop in my running. But the key, and I think kind of you nailed it right on the head, is that most of us are not patient enough. And like that, 1% of runners, like you mentioned, could never have the discipline to go slow enough to actually fully transition to barefoot running. And the problem with the barefoot running craze was everyone born to run, oh, that's what I should be doing. And everyone did it wrong because they never had the discipline to actually back off of their running to slowly progress in a fashion that their bodies could actually adapt to, because they all went from, wearing really supportive shoes and, their lifestyle to now I'm going to try to run on this, as opposed to our ancestors who were literally walking around barefoot and never wearing shoes all the time for their whole life. And now we were, fast forwarding, you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and now you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to wear shoes. Okay, let me run. Right. So that's not how our bodies work. And I think that does really explain why it hasn't been as popular, because unfortunately we did see a spike in injuries, and we saw a lot of people, suffering from pain because they weren't disciplined enough to allow that kind of progression that you speak of. And, that's one of the things I've been working on. I transitioned from heel striker to a midfoot striker probably like 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that now, and have gradually been weaning down my heel drop, have gradually been weaning down the stability in my shoes. And I would agree with you in terms of feeling the ground, how important that is. And even when I do my jump training, my plyometric training, I'm not taking my, high stack shoes to do those. I'm taking my zero drop now and lower stack height shoes when I do my plyometrics, because I actually am not trying to cushion the foot and my body from hitting the ground. I'm actually trying to feel the ground. So I use my muscles to actually decelerate and pop back up. Right. And that's what we want to do as runners, to be most efficient, to get faster, and to actually utilize our muscles. There at the conference that actually I met Naboso at, there was actually a presenter, Scott Greenberg, who's actually going to come on the podcast in a couple of weeks, who big foot guy, works for University of Florida and has done a lot of research with the foot. And he was presenting some new research that, shows that the higher stack height and the higher cushioning shoes actually increase ground reaction forces to the body when running. And, most people think I'm going to wear these high cushioning shoes to absorb impact and it takes stress off of my joints, when in fact, we find that a lot of the cushioning actually increases the forces that go through our joints, because our bodies are not reacting and adapting to the surface, kind of what you're speaking to, because we can't feel it, right? We don't feel it. So then you're hitting the surface harder. So now you're getting more ground reaction forces up through your joints, when in fact your rationale might have been to say, hey, I'm going to have this high cushioning shoe to decrease stress to my joints. But now your body's not actually feeling the ground when you hit it. So you're using less muscles. So it's very fascinating to hear that and to kind of think about. But I think it really is, it's consistent really with what you've been talking about all throughout today. And, I can seriously probably talk to you for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time and our listeners. And we don't want to make this like a 5-hour podcast episode, but let me just really recap for everyone, because you shared a lot of great information. Dr. Emily here really shared, the importance of foot stability for us as runners, and also the importance of stimulating the sensory system and how that can be powerful at decreasing some of our pain, how it could be powerful at activating our muscles and adding that sensory stimulation that most of us, quite frankly, don't get a whole lot of if you have a sit down job, or if you're wearing shoes that don't allow you that sensory stimulation. And then we kind of really did kind of deep dive, and you shared a lot of great examples of bunions and how to treat bunions and how to classify them. And then we went into Morton's neuroma, and you shared a lot of great things there. And then toe spacers, and then, the Naboso product line and the ball and how that's going to help stimulate. We talked about the mat. We talked about the toe spacers. So I'm sure there are many runners who really resonated with a lot of your messaging, because I know I do, and your approach to the foot and movement. So where can our healthy runner community best connect with you?
Yes. So for any of the Naboso products, the website for Naboso is Naboso. So naboso.com. We are on Instagram, which is Naboso_technology. And we try to always educate through that platform. Also, you get fun information on promos and webinars and other fun stuff that we do. My personal Instagram is at Dr. Emily DPM. So Dr. Emily DPM, very educational based. I love to educate, so I put lots of free
Yes.
out there. And then my podiatry practice is just my name. So it's probably easier for them to look at the show notes to see that, but it's just dremilysplichal.com. I do see patients all around the world. I do virtual consults well before COVID. I was always doing telemedicine because it works really well for the way that I shape my practice. And then I have a YouTube channel, which is probably easier for you to go to YouTube and search Dr. Emily Barefoot, and you will get hundreds of videos of me teaching exercises, explaining foot injuries. Lots of great stuff out there.
Yeah, it's a great YouTube channel. I was checking out your short foot video on your YouTube channel, which is everything that Dr. Emily really described to you guys today. You can check it out on the YouTube channel. Very informative with extras. I'm big kind of sharing education and content and exercises. And I just love your channel as well. So make sure you guys go ahead and follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow Instagram. You got some great reels there as well. So I love watching your reels and a lot of your educational content that you have there. And then do you also have a little special reward for our healthy runner community if they were to go ahead and check out naboso.com?
Yes. So if you use code Healthy Runner, you will get 20% off. So Healthy Runner, 20% off. That's on all of the products. We do free shipping. We do free 30-day returns. So if you're curious and you're just kind of intrigued, it's definitely something that people need to try. I'm sure, Dwayne, you could attest to that with the socks that you.
Indeed.
It's hard to describe them without experiencing it yourself because texture is so new to people's system.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I am a big fan of the socks, and I'm really looking forward to trying the toe spacers and the ball because I've had different foot rollers before. I have like 3 in my house, like literally like every room. So I'm really interested to try the ball because the ball looks awesome. And I love how it moves in different directions. So it's like triplanar, multi-directional, as opposed to just a foot roller that's only moving in one direction. So I'm very excited to try it.
Perfect.
Yeah. So thank you so much, honestly, for, accepting my invite, sharing your expertise. Like you just dropped so much knowledge for us, and the foot is so important for us as runners, especially. And I look forward to, learning more from you, honestly, on all of your channels that you talked about. So I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Of course. Thank you so much. I hope the listeners leave just a little bit more curious about the feet. That's my goal, to create curiosity and appreciation.
And I'm sure that goal was certainly met. So for you guys who've been listening all along, whether or not you're listening, during your run on the podcast, watching the video version in our Healthy Runner Facebook group, or on the Spark Your Training YouTube channel, I appreciate all of you. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to Dr. Emily's YouTube channel, as well as follow her on Instagram. Remember, every week we go live and do these podcast episodes. So check out what's going to be happening next week in our events tab within our Healthy Runner Facebook group, and jump on here on the live. Thank you for everyone who did attend the live today and your comments. You got a lot of positive comments on they're looking forward to trying some of what you have. And, they're very grateful for the knowledge that you shared with us today. So we appreciate that. And thank you guys. As always, remember, let's stay active, let's stay healthy, and let's just keep on running. Until next time.